Welcome to this explainer on Catch-Up Fridays. We're diving into how to turn engagement back on. So I want you to picture this. It's Friday morning, the bell just rang, and boom, 30 to 50 students completely flood into your classroom. Some look utterly exhausted, half the room is already talking loudly, and then, inevitably, you hear it. Every single teacher knows this exact moment, right? You're standing there, looking out at this sea of rowdy kids with incredibly short attention spans, and you just feel that heavy exhaustion. You're supposed to run meaningful activities for the entire day, but without it feeling like just another draining academic requirement. It's a very real, very overwhelming classroom reality. And honestly, that is exactly where the friction kicks in. The mandate from DepEd, strengthening reading skills and supporting student well-being, is fantastic on paper, but there was a massive clash between those high-level goals and the psychological reality of student boredom. The mandate sounds simple enough, but actually executing it without just handing out dry worksheets, that is incredibly tough. Which brings us to the core problem we have to unpack here. Why do they resist reading so fiercely in the first place? Think about the pain of forcing a reading assignment on students who are just going through the motions. They aren't engaged. They're just complying to get a passing grade. Or worse, they're completely tuning you out. Well, here's the fascinating part. The science shows that students aren't actually avoiding reading. They're avoiding boredom. Educational researchers call this curiosity-driven learning. When a student's brain becomes genuinely curious, their attention naturally spikes. You literally don't have to force them to focus because their brain just does it automatically. Our real goal is to turn passive readers into active participants by hacking that curiosity. So, how do we do that? Let me introduce you to a practical blueprint: the Mystery Story Challenge. Instead of handing out a boring reading passage and a list of standard comprehension questions, you turn the text into a crime scene. You read just the first paragraph aloud to the class. Then, you abruptly stop. Ask the room, okay, who is the suspect? What clues did you just notice? Let seatmates quickly discuss their theories before you move on to the next paragraph. The psychological shift here is totally wild. Suddenly, students are no longer reading because they have to, they're reading because they desperately want answers. Curiosity has completely overridden their desire to tune out. You've taken a passive requirement and transformed it into a highly engaging, high-stakes experience. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. That sounds great if I actually have books, but what if you have 50 kids and 0 resources? That is so valid. Resource scarcity is a massive, everyday hurdle on the ground. You can't exactly run a reading challenge if you physically do not have the printed materials to hand out to everyone. Enter Blueprint 2, the human library. This completely reframes the whole concept of reading. Because you see, stories don't just exist on printed pages. They exist inside people. Imagine turning your students into living books. One student shares a story of overcoming a big challenge, another talks about a unique hobby, and a third shares a life lesson they learned. The classroom itself literally becomes the library. I absolutely love this because it solves the resource problem instantly. By simply having students share their own stories, you are hitting all those DepEd requirements. You're developing deep listening skills, building real empathy, increasing communication, and boosting their confidence. And you are doing the whole shebang without spending a single peso on printing. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about a classic strategy that often kind of backfires: drop everything and read, or dear time. We all know the illusion here. You announce dear time, a few stellar students actually read, but the rest, they're secretly whispering, asking to go to the bathroom, or just staring blankly at the ceiling waiting for the clock to run out. The root issue there usually isn't laziness, it's a total lack of ownership. This brings us to Blueprint 3, the silent reading survival method. The difference here is compliance versus autonomy. Required reading, where everyone stares at the exact same text, creates pressure and resistance. But giving students choice, whether they pick comics, science articles, or short stories, completely removes that pressure. Choice turns forced compliance into genuine interest. Exactly. And to really solidify that habit, you completely remove the stress of grading. Instead of a quiz, you just ask one single, pressure-free question at the end. What is one interesting thing you discovered today? That's it. Students focus on actually understanding their chosen text instead of stressing over a score, making reading a real habit rather than just a Friday chore. But Catch-Up Fridays aren't only about reading, right? There's a huge well-being component we have to tackle. Today's students carry some incredibly heavy emotional baggage. Their attention is constantly pulled by screens, their stress levels are skyrocketing, and online drama spills over into your physical classroom all the time. How do we even begin to handle these unseen burdens? This brings us to Blueprint 4, the 5-minute mental health circle. This relies on the absolute science of listening. Students form small groups with a simple prompt, something like, "What made you smile this week?" The only rule is to listen with 0 interruptions. Research shows that simply feeling heard physically regulates the nervous system, dramatically improving a student's emotional baseline. And when it comes to values and peace education, we can finally move away from those dry, boring lectures. Blueprint 5 is the Peace Challenge. You present a realistic scenario, say 2 friends fighting, or a nasty rumor spreading online. Then, you have the students actively role-play resolving that exact conflict right there in the room. The cognitive science behind this is just fascinating. Experiences are remembered far longer than lectures ever are. When students actually role-play these solutions, they aren't just passively memorizing the definition of empathy, they're actively practicing it. It literally builds muscle memory for conflict resolution, which is what creates lasting behavioral change. When you string these blueprints together, you quickly realize Catch-Up Fridays are absolutely not a wasted day. By addressing the actual psychology of engagement, we're building deep reading abilities, respectful communication, emotional management, and real empathy. These are vital developmental milestones that traditional rote learning often completely misses. It is such an empowering realization. As an educator, you have incredible influence. A single Friday activity, when you frame it around curiosity instead of compliance, can literally change a student's trajectory. It can give a quiet student a voice and show an unmotivated reader that learning isn't just about passing tests. You hold the power to transform a noisy, chaotic Friday into the most meaningful day of their week. So, we want to leave you with this. Look at your classroom, think about your students, and ask yourself, which blueprint are you going to try out next Friday? Pick just one. Observe the shift in your classroom's energy and watch your students transform. Thanks so much for joining us on this explainer, and we will see you next time.